Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our joint ISAS NTU webinar titled After Populism, Piety and Politics in Pakistan. Today we are delighted to have with us guest speaker Dr. Afia Zia, an independent scholar from Pakistan. The chairperson of our session today will be Dr. Amit Ranjan, Research Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies. This event is being live streamed on Facebook. And now I'll hand it over to Amit to begin the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Saad, and thanks, Afia, for joining us. Before I hand over the floor to Afia, I'd like to make some brief comments. South Asia has witnessed a rise and fall of populist leaders. Populist leaders mainly ride on people's emotions. They craft big dreams, promising to significantly improve the life of middle class and toiling masses. While it's supporting a populist leader, the people did not care how, in long term, his or her views and policy damage the country. People even less bothered how populist leaders' ideology and religious thinking would affect their position in society and at home. A populist figure cannot get success without a support from country's powerful institutions, that is social, religious, and political, which back him or to serve their purposes. The moment rifts erupt between populist leader and powerful institutions, downfall of the leader began. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan was initially supported by the Pakistani army and a large number of urban middle class voters. His conservative and religious thinking could not even deter many women from supporting him. After losing support from army, Imran Khan lost power and charged with corruption. He is now in jail but still commands a good amount of political support. In today's presentation, Afia analyzes the failure of civilian military hybrid governance and explores the potential in current anti-army sentiment to recalibrate social and political relations. Afia, please.
Thank you so much, Amit and Saad, and Jordan as well. Thank you to the Institute of South Asian Studies for the opportunity to present my research on piety, populism, and post-feminism in Pakistan. I'm just going to share the screen and share some of the images which may help the audience to understand what's happening. So my interdisciplinary work draws from sociology, from political science, and from gender studies. And while I do focus on Pakistan, these themes, as Amit said, hold broader implications for South Asia and indeed global democracy and human and women's rights. So I'll begin with just listing some of the key features of contemporary populism. It is a theory that is admittedly underbaked and still in progress. Mudd calls it a thin-centered ideology, different from thick ones like socialism. And practically all the theorists do talk about this one common feature of populists or populism, which is to save the pure common man from the corrupt elites. This is a constant. There are other theorists who have talked about varieties of populism. Sometimes it is used to refer to an ideology, sometimes to a style, sometimes to strategy. But as Filk and others say that one of the things about left-wing populism has tended to be, as a model, it tends to be more inclusionary, while the right-wing kind model of populism focuses more on exclusionary strategic ways of politics. And this tends to be divisive. It tends to create an illiberal climate. It kind of undermines intermediary institutions like the judiciary. And populists themselves rely on direct communications with through social media in particular, rather than formal media. And importantly for my own research, what Mudd says is that populism is moralistic rather than pragmatic. And this is quite interesting. The populist also is found to offer simplistic solutions to very complex problems and does tend to rely on stunts and gimmicks. And I'll discuss some of these. Palinkas notes how the populist always appeals to and advocates the idea of crises, and about imagined or real threats to the nation, to their religion, and a kind of a nostalgic tapping into a nostalgia about the imagined purity of nation. And as Weber has said that the populism depends on a charismatic representative. That is also a key feature. if you look at some of the rise of contemporary populists, we'll notice that it's not a coincidence that there is such a, on the top right, if you see the kind of the leaders over there, you'll see are all of a certain kind of they've had, all of these have had long-term kind of rules. Like sometimes, like you'll see Erdogan has had in his 21st year. You'll have Putin is president of Russia right now. Narendra Modi has been 3 times Prime Minister of India elected, and these are the kind of the longevity of it is important. On the top left corner, if you see in Mexico, also these are all sort of long-standing and sort of re-elected populists that we've noticed. We have also in the middle, if you see, on the top middle and at the bottom corner, we have both of the president of Turkey in his 21st year, in fact, and at the bottom, Imran Khan. They are both over here, if you notice, with the character who's played the role of Ertugrul in this very popular TV Turkish soap opera, which is about a 13th century crusader of Islamic history. And in fact, so there's this idea of an appeal to populists appeal to these fictional characters also, which is quite interesting because when Imran Khan appealed to this idea, the nostalgia of a 13th century sort of didactic character, they actually erected a statue in his as this character in Lahore in 2020. So we'll notice that they not only have sort of this kind of joint, and the reason I point out Erdogan and Imran Khan in comparison is that they sort of represent the concept of the Homo Islamicus. And the Homo Islamicus is this archetype populist who merges piety with governance as part of their populist appeal. And I'll come back to this in a bit, but I just want to point out on the right, I've just listed a few of the common traits of populist leaders, which is that they tend to rely on and exude personal charisma rather than intellectualism. They do rely on a lot of performativity. They claim to be anti-elite, and they do have a certain vanity that is part of their personas. They rely a lot on and promote nationalism and religious revivalism. They tend to offer, as Amit said in the beginning, a kind of a paternalism. They do represent overt hyper-masculinity, if you notice in them. They do promote racial and religious exclusion, and they tend to pull the system towards a presidential one. They prefer the presidential system over a parliamentary consensus-based one. In a different published paper, recent published paper, I have offered a comparative study of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and at that time Pakistan's Imran Khan and their use of piety as a performative decoy for growing authoritarianism in both countries. And one of the important features here is that piety is different from religiosity. It offers a more subtle shift and in contrast with outright theocracy or dictatorships. As Hadis and others have found, Islamic populism in the 21st century holds ties to neoliberalism, migration, and the dismantling of welfare states. I've studied how populism like TikTok in South Asia on platforms like TikTok reveal these combined sentiments of nationalism, piety, and consumerism in neoliberal times. And these are expressed, for example, here in Pakistan's subaltern men's aspirations. This is Jam Safdar's account, and you can see the kind of aspiration, nationalism, modernity, consumerism represented in their expressions on social media. After the events of 9/11 in 2001, there was a clear shift in Pakistani scholarship from Marxist and feminist lens and analysis to predominantly now anthropological interest in Muslims' identities, particularly Muslim women's pietist movements and consumer habits, and the reformist possibilities in empowerment through Islam rather than liberal secular goals and methods. And here in the slide, I've just tried to reflect the broader postmodern, post-secular academic trends that we find in Western academia, certainly. But in Pakistan, we noticed that scholarship over the last 20 years has moved away from the kind of class identities that were being studied through land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, to identity-based scholarship and interests on piety, on moral injury, on consumerism, on evangelism. And there's been a lot of that. Now, in the 1990s, Pakistani feminist slogans protested the intersectionalities of patriarchy, and which I've coined as the 4 M's, which is men, military, markets, and Maulvis or clerics. It's well known that in Pakistan, the military has been a broker and breaker of civilian leaders and parties. It has ruled in varying capacities for as long as civilians have, and the more recent experiment was known as the hybrid civil-military government under Imran Khan between 2018 and 2022, with the military underwriting Khan's governance on the pretext of a joint project to save the people from the prevailing corrupt elite parties. And these 4 M's illustrate the nexus of military political capitalism and social conservatism. If you see the image on the left, it captures the intersectionality of military and piety. This is the former chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, who orchestrated Khan's rise into the Prime Minister office. And on the other side is Khan's third wife, Bushra Bibi, who embodies the piety of the full veil nature. On the top image is the real estate tycoon Malik Riaz, who symbolizes neoliberal connectivity between state elites. And I've argued he's probably the most powerful player in Pakistan today. At the bottom is an image of the cleric Tariq Jamil, who has been jurisconsult to Imran Khan, who's kind of obsessed with celestial virgins or hoods. He has also blamed COVID as divine punishment for women's immodesty. And he's also launched a brand of clothing, which is all of it kind of represents the clerical elite who mix piety with consumerism. So the 4 M's. Now, Imran Khan's popularity actually converted, he was always popular, but it converted into political populism only after he repented his lifelong secular lifestyle. And then he promoted his vision of a Riyasat-e-Medina modeled on the 7th century city of Medina and appealed to nostalgia for Islamic egalitarianism. Khan's governance reflects the Homo Islamicus model, merging Islamic morality with capitalist development to counter what he calls colonial slavery or ghulami, and by wanting to preserve Islamic traditional values against the influences of infidel medias like Bollywood films, which he objects to, and what he summarizes as the evils of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. His self-redemption, though, is not fake. It's a genuine affect, and it is a part of the post-9/11 turn in piety politics in the Muslim world, especially amongst celebrities, performing artists, and athletes, and it's very well documented by the theorists that I've listed over here. Especially the last one, Karen Van Newkirk's work on repentant artists, dancers, singers, and actors in Egypt actually offers a very close parallel to what is happening in Pakistan today. And these images are just prior to his election, praying at a Sufi shrine that is a patron of which the patron saint, which his wife is a follower of. Now, despite the 22 years of political irrelevance, Imran Khan's victimhood narrative only began after he first lost the elections of 2013, and he didn't really lose them. He won one province, but because he didn't become immediately the prime minister, it kind of transformed him into a populist, all the preparation and the campaigning that went in. Later on, when he became prime minister, his governance combined the performative austerity and Islamophobia rhetoric, but lacked substance. He used lots of stunts and gimmicks, selling buffaloes and cars of the Prime Minister house to repay loans. And he claimed that I am democracy, as we see on the newspaper on the right. He also often said how he knew the West better than anyone else, and he attacked and mocked and passed sexist slurs against the opposition leaders, pretty much in the Donald Trump style. In the middle image on the right over here is a journalist in the bathtub. He was here reporting from the Prime Minister's house in 2018 to expose the extravagant lifestyle of previous elitist leaders. And unfortunately, it ended up just becoming a meme, but this did symbolize the performative aspects of Imran Khan's party and its appeal for his supporters. Khan also attacked what he called Khuni liberals or bloodthirsty liberals and secular elites who were critical about his sexist remarks on rape and his victim-blaming rhetoric and the slurs he used against opposition leaders. While his conservative views on the declared heretic Ahmadis, on the Hazara minorities, and the Pashtun Tahaffuz movements were also a reflection of the illiberal otherizing of minorities. And so all of this combined with the economic chaos congealed into the overall impression that Khan's government was led by hubris and incompetence. And so the military was clearly impatient now with their hybrid partner, and Khan was ousted through a no-confidence vote in 2022, keeping up with the record of no civilian prime minister having completed their term in office to date. So following this, Khan and his party resigned from parliament, and this amplified his victimhood, rallying supporters with slogans of betrayal of Khan by the military, and they actually believed in Khan's suspicion that he was a victim of regime change manipulated by the United States. So he often refers to the ruling coalition after him as imported government. In fact, Imran Khan has used the highly effective method of subverting the state's favorite trope of Ghaddari or treachery that had previously only been reserved for civilian politicians as sellouts and sort of justifications on why a reluctant but very patriotic military was compelled to intervene and take over government and save the nation. And the Pakistan Army does claim the highest moral badge of patriotism. In fact, its motto is Iman, Taqwa, Jihad, faith, piety, jihad. And Khan's rhetoric challenges military leadership by likening them to notorious traitors within Islamic history. So after he was ousted, he spoke for hours at rallies likening his opponents to Yazid, the turncoat caliph of the Umayyad period, and to traitors Mir Jafars and Mir Sadiq from Mughal history. And he also included pop cultural references to mock the generals for their claim to be neutral, and even made a reference to Dirty Harry. And what has happened is that these have successfully become part of the political colloquial in Pakistan. The common man uses these terms and references. My third thematic interest is on Khan's iconic and masculine appeal for women. And a quick backdrop on the women's political activism in Pakistan. Here, Pakistan had a strong women's movement since independence in 1947. And here in the early years, we see it was actually the early years were marked for nation building and in what was always conceived as a modern nation state, not a theocratic state. So you have the wife of the first prime minister who set up the All Pakistan Women's Association. We passed the Muslim Family Law Ordinance in 1961, one of the most progressive family laws for Muslims, for Muslim women around the world, on polygamy, on divorce rights, etc. There was a strong family planning messaging and campaign at that time. But early on, military intervention was resisted by student movements against the atrocities committed by the army when East Pakistan fought for independence as Bangladesh in 1971. There was student unions and there was movements and women's organizations, including left organizations. But by 1977, General Zia-ul-Haq staged a coup and over the next decade implemented a sham series of Islamization policies which targeted women's rights, and he passed discriminatory anti-women and minorities policies, and moral policing was rampant. Here too we see a strong resistance by women's groups at this time. And if you see the image on the right, it's actually of Benazir Bhutto, who returned from exile in 1988, and she was elected after the plane crash that killed General Zia-ul-Haq. She came back, fought elections, and elected to become the first woman leader in the Muslim world, and is a popular leader. And I'll mention that a little bit later in comparison to Imran Khan. Now, after a decade of uneasy civilian rule, in contrast to General Zia, we have General Musharraf take over, and his liberal policies, very different from General Zia's, saw women's empowerment used as a tool to promote a liberal facade amidst the war on terror that he offered to fight with the United States. And this came at the cost of democratic spaces, and it emboldened right-wing forces electorally for the first time. And of course, this showcasing of the instrumentalization of women's rights were all being used for authoritarian ends. And this was a period that was fraught with contradictions and ideological paradoxes. Now, the term post-feminism first emerged in the 1990s to describe a global backlash against feminism, which suggested that either feminism was no longer needed because gender equality had been achieved, or that it had left women worse off than before. Now, similar trends were observed in Muslim contexts in the post-9/11 period, where post-feminist piety movements gained relevance, and they also rejected feminism as a liberal Western conceit. And United States-led interventions in Muslim countries at this time under the false pretext of saving Muslim women worsened this shift and made things even more divided. Muslim women's piety movements became stronger in Pakistan, and they stabilized patriarchy and they undermined prior feminist progress. And in many cases, this pietist agency directly benefited militant groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiyiba, where mothers sacrificed their sons for the larger jihadist cause, and in Swat, where women initially donated to the Taliban to bring about Sharia rule. And in the slide here, we see the radical activism by women's seminaries of the Jamia Hafsa Madrasa, who were part of the Red Mosque uprising in Islamabad in 2007, and who exemplify how piety politics transitions from personal virtue to public activism very easily. Their moral crusades alongside radical stances demonstrated how performative piety can legitimize extremism with a feminine face. But the Pakistani state is always one step ahead, and they know how to co-opt this feminine agency for its own end. For example, in the case of former model and actress Veena Malik here, whose transformation from controversial celebrity to pietist nationalist highlights how piety politics tames dissenting women into patriotic subjects. The state used her to defend Imran Khan against criticism from other women and feminists when it was installing him in power. If you look at the bottom slide on the right, this in the background is showing a growing celebrity support for Imran Khan, which shows the trend of repentance of what is considered morally bankrupt Western secular values and careers like acting and being celebrity, and giving that up, forfeiting them in order to embrace piety instead. This is all thought to be part of the process of virtue seeking and repentance. By 2022, the military severed ties with Khan, resulting in his removal and subsequent mass protests over the country. Partially, his increased populism is in admiration for his genuine defiance of the military, but also his treatment by the state signals a closure between the elite and the common person, where the latter is routinely denied justice or afforded due legal process. So the fact that Imran Khan is being denied that kind of legal process and injustices has gained resonance and sympathy for Khan. After he was shot in the leg in one of his rallies, very Trump-style shooting, his populism rose even more. And despite the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf's disarray, his party is in disarray, in February 20 of this year, in the elections, the national elections, the results showed Khan's enduring populist appeal in the votes that he received despite mass riggings. And in this slide, we see the almost maternal imagery that is applied to Khan on many social media accounts. And yes, there's some fetishizing of vegetables, but essentially this is kind of blurring the elite-commoner divide. Now, the subsequent arrest of Khan and his wife in multiple cases amplified anger of his supporters against state institutions. This new chief of the army staff, Asim Munir, who is a Hafiz-e-Quran or has memorized the Quran and is conservative, is currently implementing a brutal policy of zero tolerance for Khan's politics and brinkmanship. And again, in the current heavily censored climate, the backlash and defiance against the military is found here in social media articulations because it's extremely censored and freedom of expression is really shuttered. So you'll find this kind of defiance, and I think this has been fairly unprecedented. My research argues that Khan has galvanized women's political participation in an extraordinary manner in recent time. These women have risked their professions and their personal safety and even defied their own families in many cases to rage against the state and military leaders. These are a few quotes from the women's activists of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, revealing their radical defiance and reflecting the emotional and political mobilization of Khan's populism. You know, a lot of them, he is our boss, he's the only one who cares about us. He didn't create hate culture. I love my army, but they block the only man for democracy. He is constantly misunderstood by feminists. His words are taken out of context. And, you know, the wearing of his masks and the kind of sort of almost a Foucauldian identification with Imran Khan. I want to now just play here a 3-minute video, which is sort of clips of the kind of activism that we saw from women over the last year and a half.
खान साहब, आप तो प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस करके चले गए हैं, लेकिन हमारे दिल अब तक लरस रहे हैं। मतलब आपने कैसे सोच लिया कि हम ये बर्दाश्त कर सकते हैं? खान साहब, हमें आपकी जिंदगी चाहिए, हमें आप चाहिए। हमारे हाथ जुड़े आपके सामने, इन माओ, बहनों, बेटियों के, प्लीज हमें आपकी जिंदगी चाहिए।
जो मैं कर सकता था मैंने किया, किसी ने ऐसा नहीं किया मुझे इतना ज्यादा मेरी जिम्मेदारी थी। और मेरी ज़मीं अफ़सोस नहीं, जो तेरे लिए सादर सो महफूज़ रहे तेरी आन सदा का जाने मेरी ये रहे ना रहे। गोलियां खाने के बाद वो बंदा जिस तरह से आया सामने और वो तकलीफ में है, लेकिन जैसे ही वो हमें वर्कर्स की तरफ देखते हैं तो वो मुस्कुराते हैं और वो हाथ फैलाते हैं और उसके बाद वो मौके पर निशान देते हैं। ये होता है
अस्सलामुअलैकुम, मैं माया हैदर जर्मनी से। हम यहाँ आज जर्मनी में पाकिस्तान एम्बेसी के सामने प्रोटेस्ट करते हैं जो खान साहब को इन्होंने अरेस्ट किया हुआ है, उनकी जो अरेस्ट है इलीगल, उसके खिलाफ। मेरी अपनी राय के मुताबिक एज अ डॉक्टर, क्योंकि मेरी अपनी साइंस वहां फेल हो जाती है जाके, कि आप किसी को हिप्नोटाइज कर लें, फिर आप उसको मैग्नेटाइज कर लें, और फिर उसको मैस्मराइज कर लें.
So, in conclusion, really, we see here Khan's populism has mobilized urban middle-class women in ways distinct from past leaders. While the appeal of Benazir Bhutto lay in gender solidarity and empathy, Khan's support is filtered through patriarchal influences and not for feminist ends. As Julie Mostov has observed, populism is always gendered and dangerous. So the current fusion of piety, populism, and post-feminism offers very limited avenues for structural reforms in Pakistan. But as Benjamin Arditi suggests, populism's disruptive presence might expose systemic flaws and offer windows for strategic resistance against authoritarianism and military hegemony. The next year or so, I think, will reveal which direction bears true for Pakistan. And I'll stop here, Amit.
Thanks, Afia, for wonderful presentation. I believe that this presentation many questions from our participants and audience. Before I ask the participants to type and send us the questions, I have few comments and questions which you can respond now.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you look at talk about the theories of populism, I believe that politics is all about consensus, social and political consensus, while the especially the pluralist society, post-colonial pluralist society. But with the rise of populism, how much this pluralism is affected? Like if you look at India, Pakistan, this is the first, and second, the basic unit in any country is home. So how much your home and relation between people, relation between a male and female, getting affected the rise of populist leader because home reflects the society. Then third, if you look at the Imran Khan's popularity, he's still popular, but there's also a issue that people feel that the others, like Nawaz Sharif or PPP, they have not performed well. So let's go for him. And populist leader always, exploit such sentiments and sometimes construct like they ask, okay, so everyone is traitor, they are corrupt leaders, so they make such noises, and which many people, especially the middle class, upper middle class, they buy it very easily. While the poor people feel that, okay, so I don't have anything, they didn't give me anything, so let's go for him, let's try. So how much damage, how much they help PPP and PMLF, how much they help, their policies help Imran Khan to become more and more popular?
Yeah. So all three important questions, Amit. So the idea of, how does one, I completely agree that the concept of democracy has been theorized only in civil and military tensions in Pakistan. Most of the analysis you'll see, and at best you have people like Dr. Aisha Siddiqa who has at least tried to look at the structure, the political economy, and other aspects of it. But democracy in itself has not been redefined and thought and theorized in Pakistan, right? It's always been the 4 M's and the intersections that we've discussed. So the concept of consensus and the concept of consensus building, the closest Pakistan came to it was in this decision between PMLN, Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto in 2008 when they signed the Charter of Democracy. That was the first time the concept trickled down that, it doesn't have to be enmities and it doesn't have to be, but when you are fighting when the opposition is not within a democratic realm, when the overall climate is not democratic, how does one explain to somebody who is populists tend to be narcissistic, they tend to be so the savior, the lone savior, they play on their one-man players. So they already come without this history or an understanding of consensus. So that's one tension, the refusal. It's like a virtue not to talk to somebody else, not to talk to the chores, the dakus, the dacoits, the elite, the sold out, dynastic parties, all the rest of it. So that's a major flaw in democratic thinking. But he does represent hope because he's unproven. And the few years that he had, because the state made him a victim so quickly. In 2013, when he lost, people said, why has he lost? Why did he lose? They were trying to analyze, there was so much following, he was so popular. And I said at that time, because he's not a victim. He's the only leader who hasn't been a victim so far. And in Pakistan, my theory is that until you become a victim, you cannot become a leader. And so now that he's played that, exhausted that, so of course he brings even more hope that he's sacrificed, his time and been brought down. One of the very interesting comments made by one of the women I interviewed, she said, these elites and these rich parties and the rich leaders of the other parties, and they have these big mansions, and they corrupt and they're greedy. And I said, well, Imran Khan is wealthy as well. He's of the landed elite. He's not poor. And she said, no, but that is generational wealth. Okay, so now that brings me to your third question about the middle classes. This kind of, and that's why I showed Amit the picture of Malik Riaz, who represents and appeals very much, and sort of his whole projects are aimed at middle classes being able to afford and buy property, and real estate is the only game in Pakistan's economy right now, right? So it's that connectivity is all over there, the middle classes, and there is some debate in Pakistan whether Khan's populism is to a genuine middle class sensibility, or it is because of all the other factors that I have mentioned, and giving agency to how the state is creating the populace. That's a genuine debate. I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not going to pretend I know it, but I'm saying that this is an ongoing discussion on how genuine the middle class sensibility, and of course, for me, piety and false consciousness combine to mobilize the middle class support for him.
The role of social and political institutions, structures, they play very important role in pushing the populist leader and asking people to support. So I don't think without their support, a populist leader can,
Yeah. But what happens is once the leader becomes a populist, he or she is out of control, then they don't need you anymore. They don't need institutions. They've got the people. So there is something genuinely appealing about it. That's why many of us who are big critics of Imran Khan are now sort of looking, how can we strategically create this wedge where, at least one institution is subdued and sort of does not play. So it's a very precarious situation right now and it is a problem because many liberal and democratic thinkers, pro-democracy thinkers, are not willing to actually, they have not forgiven Imran Khan in that sense because of the combination of, he's not liberal, he's very confused himself, he doesn't offer any stable economic alternatives. He's not a great alternative for them, but at least strategically, I keep saying, he's useful, and we should find ways to use him to pry open the civil, to destroy the hybrid relationship, if you like. That should go.
There's also big support from Pakistani diaspora.
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing. But that's the other point that we notice this both in India and Pakistan, that the populists have huge diasporic support over there. And I think, Amit, that is also to do a lot with the kind of Islamic populism, at least shows how neoliberalism has actually, and migration and racism in these countries has made it hard for identities to break away from their home, right? So you'll see a new generational, and of course, connectivity and social media has enabled keeping in touch and having an identity at home and in diaspora as well, right? You don't have
to talks about long distance nationalism.
Yes.
That's more dangerous because when I meet diaspora, they are more nationalist than people who live in New Delhi.
Yeah, more nationalist, more ill-informed because information is not great anyway, and so yeah, that's a major issue as well. Challenge.
There's a question, Tehreek. As a Chinese woman, I observe that gender inequality is pervasive across East Asia. Recently, there has been a surge in public awareness in China, advocating for the protection of women's right to use safe and high quality menstrual products, addressing the issue of some manufacturers using substandard materials unfit for direct contact with the skin.
Hmm.
First point she has made, in the future, could China and Pakistan collaborate in advancing women's rights, particularly in areas such as the BRI or through ensuring safeguards for women's employment in cross-border trade?
Mhm.
And second question, in Pakistan, certain forms of free expression or calls for change in women's movements are deemed illegal or immoral by the government. How can we effectively protect the pioneers of these women's movements and ensure their efforts are not stifled by such restrictions?
Yeah. So I can answer. Let me attempt
Yeah.
to do the first question. Really interesting. I think the China-Pakistan collaboration thing, it's really interesting because China does support a lot of projects in Pakistan, has is an ally, etc. But there's been very little cultural connectivity. Cultural relationships have not been forged. It's been economics. It's been all white men, old men from both sides who have brokered the deals, and there's never been an attempt to Pakistan has got a very strong South Asian, the women's movement in Pakistan has a very South Asian turn and bent, very close relationship with Indian feminists, Bangladeshi feminists, Sri Lankan, and so on. And even that has, over time, and neoliberalism, that's also distance, but there's still that connectivity with Afghan women's organizations as well in Afghanistan, some in Iran, but not in China. And I think one of the problems is that there is not a vocabulary that has enabled the kind of bridging. There's no shared history and there's no new vocabulary. And, China's been closed and Pakistan's, we don't share religion, we don't share a kind of a cultural affinity. Now, the example that the questioner has pointed out is very appropriate because what's happened is that globally with the Me Too movement and anti-sexual harassment movement, sexual politics there's been a breaking of taboo in all cultures, including Pakistan, including China. And women have spoken out about these kind of oppressive and patriarchal male attitudes and made some progress on it. So I think that is one avenue, not just products, not just recognizing women's biological requirements and needs, but also it's an opportunity, and I do see that happening, of sharing examples and sharing experiences that enable some kind of solidarity. And it's been academic so far. I've seen very interesting examples of the China Me Too movement in China and the limits of it. And Pakistan also, we have limits. I think that's an opportunity that we need to build a platform on, and perhaps have more connectivity. Chinese organizations or the Chinese government doesn't fund women's rights issues in Pakistan. They don't touch human rights, they don't end women's rights. So, can we get past that? I think in the future, if there is determination by feminists on both sides, that can happen. On the second question, quite simple. I mean, not every feminist will agree with me in Pakistan, and there's a debate on this. But I really, really feel, and that has been the tradition of feminist movements in Pakistan, has been that we have always fought, what I mentioned in one slide, for equal legal rights, or at least increasing progressive gender laws that will deliver gender justice or will deliver gender equality in Pakistan. So unless we hold on to the laws, because laws is where they go for first, both the clerics and dictators, they try and undermine legal rights for women, family laws, property laws. There are many things that are not equal for women legally. And so politically, we've made some advances and some progress, which is why these women, Imran Khan's women supporters, have the kind of space that they had, which never used to exist before. But so legal rights are incredibly important. Economically, Pakistan's labor force participation, etc., is quite abysmal. There's no progress and no work done on that. But unless we hold on to our legal rights, we're always fighting that battle. Yes, you're right. We will, and the attacks on the law happen to always be that they're not Islamic enough or that they are repugnant to Islam. That debate and tension takes up a lot of our energies and times, but it's a very important frontier to defend.
See, if you look at the domestic violence law, so we
Yeah.
have the laws, but still the violence continues because of the
So, yeah, I think it's important. There are two things about the law that is important to point out, because people often say that, the law doesn't really help, doesn't work. But my answer has always been a myth that how come bad laws work really well? When dictators come and put discriminatory laws, those work very well. There's police is vigilant. They go into the parks and they, drag you out and they police in your house and they enter your. So if they can go into your houses to do that kind of policing, then they can do it for domestic violence also. So I don't accept that excuse. But on the other hand, what's happened is that the law doesn't have to always play itself out. But what it does is it signals that the state is on the women's side. That's very important. The state can only be on two. It's got to be either for you or against you, right? So one that, and I've seen lawyer friends, feminist lawyers tell me in Pakistan that the Domestic Violence Act law acts as a deterrent. A lot of working class women will threaten their husbands that we will take you. We will register a case against you. Now, no law is successful in that sense. Rights-based laws are very difficult to implement. But even laws like underage marriages, if a cleric holds ceremony and contracts a marriage of an underage girl, he also goes to prison. And we've seen that being implemented. There is pressure in doing it. So, it does work in many cases. It's a matter of tracking what we can do to improve those laws. But it's important to hold on to that.
I have another question, Cherry. How do you feel these women's loyalty will move over the next 10 years?
That's a great question. That's a
How
great
do you
question.
how do you see this movement evolving? Will women's sentiments and loyalty play a bigger role in how the state decides who will next come to power?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is another question, say person that how would a politician's gender politics affect women's idea of gender equality in the future? If someone more progressive is vocal, will women push back or adapt? How would it play out?
Great questions. Okay, so two aspects to the questions. The first is on predicting the loyalty factor. I think that's a good way to put it. It is a certain kind of loyalty. Now, I'm interviewing a lot of these women. I haven't got the real answer, the crux. I haven't cracked it yet, right? Because a lot of them, they speak openly, they're defiant, they risk patriarchy within their own thing. But some work in progress theories are that many of them, and this is true for the other examples I gave also, what supporting the Taliban in Swat, what supporting radical organizations, what supporting Imran Khan does is it allows you to break the immediate patriarchy in your house, in your community. And yes, you may be voting for another kind of patriarch or whatever, but at least in the immediate sense, it gives you negotiating space. These women are able to go on jalsas on the street. They're able to dance and, collect as a sisterhood on the street, which is very rare in Pakistan. You either go and you vote. And so I think that is what is the temperature to be measured is this. Will the loyalty stay? I think it will stay for a certain generation, the first wave of Imran Khan supporters, that will stay. I think they will wait to see whether these women are going to be rewarded or not for their loyalty. There is some kind of offer of giving seats, reserve seats to the women who do. That's always a great reward to give, which I don't think women should accept for itself. But anyway, you know how politics works. And I think it will depend on what they deliver in if he should come back to power at some point. I think there's going to be an element of it. The second wave may be more demanding, right? And this links to the other question of, will women vote for a better alternative or somebody who promises women's rights, etc. People in South Asia still vote according to the Baradari system, according to the community system. They don't necessarily vote on gender, although they do vote on personality, which is also important, right? So, what's going to be important to watch? How Imran Khan's wife is now coming into becoming a political voice, which we always predicted would happen. But, in the beginning, they always say, we don't want to come into politics. We'll never come into politics. But they do. They're political animals, which is a good sign, I think. So, and some of the studies that are done on, we don't have very good studies on gender disaggregated data on women's voting behavior, but recently some analysis shows that this is a huge missed opportunities. Political parties in Pakistan do not they do not aim for women's votes. They don't target women for their votes, which is very different from the Narendra Modi style. They don't promise them anything specific. They don't address them directly. You've never heard a slogan or a campaign saying, with the exception of the Benazir Income Support Program, which is a cash handout, which started and which is hugely successful, and it is a vote gatherer, mobilizer. But there's nothing specifically targeted at women, and that's a huge missed opportunity. And I think there are votes to be gathered over there, a vote bank to be tapped into if some candidate were to do it, or if somebody savvy in Imran Khan's campaign and in his party understood this. But you have to remember, there is a difference between women's rights and feminist rights. And these women are not feminists. That's a huge difference with the Benazir Bhutto supporters who were feminists. So they had a different agenda when they came into power. These women's sensibilities are not that of feminists. But again, I say it's an opportunity. We should be feminizing them. We should be training them, teaching them, and pulling them, attracting them towards the feminist goals.
Yeah, in India, it was the Indian state of Bihar in Chief Minister Nitish Kumar. He was the one, was the first, I think, who created women voters by saying that if you get so much percentage of marks in class 12 examination, the state will provide a bicycle. And that bicycle was seen as a freedom for many students.
Yeah.
Because you can ride bicycle, you can go to college, which is at some distance. So that was the first. But you're correct that at the bigger level in South Asia, especially women has never been considered to be a voter. They are always considered that, okay, so where the male folk or male head of the family is going to cast a vote, the women just follow his instructions. So,
although in the last election 2018, I analyzed some of the gender disaggregated data, and it showed not increasing, but disparate trends of deviant voting, where women have deviated away from the male voters of their households. And I think that what Imran Khan's party doesn't realize is that he has managed to break some. I'm not saying all the votes went to him, but when you have more options, they crack the conventional mode of elections. And this has become a vicious cycle. Parties don't campaign for women's votes, so women don't vote. Then parties don't campaign for their vote, then women don't vote. So it's become a vicious cycle which needs to be broken with some kind of imagination. You're right.
PMLN and PPP.
Yeah, so what they do is once they empower, actually, there are a couple of things. These are older parties. They don't know how to use social media in the same savvy way that Imran Khan supporters do. Imran Khan supporters use it so badly, like for a populist one. But when they become mature about it, once Benazir, once the People's Party and PMLN come into power, they tend to do a lot of things that are pro-women things, especially in the new post-Charter of Democracy. It's almost competitive. How many laws can we pass for women, and like you say, it's not always implementing them, but passing them. So the PTI has not caught on to that. It doesn't see women as its constituents. So you're so busy, sort of a conservative kind of thing and appealing to piety, which is airy-fairy, it's non-substantive. He's not looking at increasing the labor force participation because that's not part of the piety project, right? And the other parties are not either, they're also not informed by feminist sensibilities anymore. So, and there's been a huge disconnect in the last few years between the women's movements and these parties as well. We lobby for laws, but in terms of advising, etc., and like you say, a new middle class is coming and taking these political positions, but not with any ideology. So there's a lack of left ideology, there's a lack of feminist ideology. So who's going to come up with these great ideas? There's no space right now for them. Ideally, it would be a great time for a feminist or a left party to break in, but there's no appetite for that right now.
The representation of women in political parties, be it PPP, PML, and others, they are all parties. So they must have some number of women faces.
Yeah, they do. But like I said, that they are new entrants and they are debutantes and sort of making and they follow the kind of male agenda in that sense. There's no feminist consciousness that has been built, which used to be the way in previous times, because women's movements prepared them. Even the NGOs have sort of become underfunded. We're not managing to see the kind of efforts and energies that were put into prior elections and training counselors and grassroots women and peasant women. We don't see that same energy. The climate has shifted a lot. One, there's oppression, there's state oppression, state crackdown. And secondly, there is a lack of funds in these, and the rights-based discourse has completely been displaced. It's like it's in small pockets now.
I have another question, Jari. How much do you feel the state of the economy in Pakistan will affect the women's movement toward feminism, both culturally in society and in the political landscape?
Completely. So I've been arguing for many years that unless the feminist movement also, you see, for like I showed in the slides, historically, we've been fighting dictatorship. We've been fighting for democracy, for women's representation in law and in parliament. But the economy has been a hugely neglected area. And this kind of neoliberal economics without a left party subduing or stonewalling or finding alternatives. And like I said, female labor force participation has gone down. Piety movements don't help. Religious discourse about gender segregated roles in society have also, and there is this overall cultural, which is shared with India as well, this cultural stigmatization of the working woman, of the single working woman, and unmarriageable woman. All of those things combine to prevent the articulation or the nexus or the influence. And the logical way should be that, and especially for socialist feminists who see the economy as the major driver or as the major, sort of method of achieving gender equality or gender justice. And that's a huge gap, and that's a major challenge. And just small things, just in comparison with India, I've been saying this for a decade now, that we don't have feminist economists in Pakistan. We don't have, and so these are very different so Pakistan is different from Bangladesh in the sense that Bangladesh has taken a female labor force participation on, and I'm not suggesting that automatic rights come over there, but it makes a difference, right? With education and with working women, working women, that makes a difference on their empowerment. And in India, you have political participation, and you also have sort of economic rights over there. So that gives them empowerment over there. In Pakistan, we have neither. And that does explain why Pakistan is on the lowest rung of gender empowerment global indices. We just have Afghanistan and Yemen or somebody below us. And it's not an emergency concern for any party, any one party. They'll make ceremonial noises about it, but there's no agenda, or if you look at their manifestos, nothing substantive offered on how to deal with this in a radical way. So yes, this is good. The economy is the only thing that they should be focusing on in the next decade or so, in terms of their vision, at least.
And I think that post-COVID situation wasn't, especially
No, trust me, pre-COVID also, there was no plan.
for the decline. Other question, in your opinion, why hasn't the gender rights that are provided by the Quran and even the more equal perspectives present in Sufism taken root in society as a kind of contradictions to the patriarchy / political rhetoric?
Yeah. So now that is one thing that has been debated a lot in Pakistan. One of the things that the characteristics of the Pakistani women's movement, and there's been quite a bit of literature and debate and discussion around it, on which path holds the most promise for rights, gender rights. And some women within the women's movement felt that the Islamic path, or the working to reform rights within the Islamic framework, would get us more legitimacy, would get you more power, more empowerment. And another part felt that secular rights and secular goals and liberal sort of rights would achieve that quicker. The stronger radical women's movement has tended to be liberal secular and has managed to get tangible relief and tangible rights. That's been the lesson that you can, they can produce that proof for you, evidence for you. But Islamic rights, look, you're not the only actor who's in the game, right? You've got clerics, you've got the right wing, you've got right wing women also. So you are arguing against different, multiple interpretations. And some come from, mostly they come from the conservative end. So in answer to the question is, how are you going to fight the conservative? And yes, you do have to fight for the turf of authenticity, for the right interpretation, for the appropriate but there's always a backlash. You take one step forward and you take two steps back because you're constantly negotiating. And nothing is ever settled. In law and liberal rights and ILO rights and gender justice, there are clear markers and you tick them off and you've achieved those rights. How do you measure Islamic rights? And how do you measure whether you have progressed or not in that regard, right? So it's a very difficult task to achieve. And frankly, I'm not sure that, if you look at the literature, it's usually secular states, Muslim majority states that manage to give these rights under the garb of Islamic rights, but very rarely do Islamic republics or Islamic law, legally judicial entities manage to give these rights to women. So we have to figure out the answer really lies in the combination within a country. My personal bias has been, and my own argumentation has been, that the only way that you can get non-negotiable equal rights in Pakistan is if you take a secular route to it. The Islamic framing in my study for the last 27 years has not shown the kind of promise or hope that people impinge on it. And we revisit it again and again and again. Sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's piety, sometimes it's agency, and it's only seen a backlash and lack of success. But that's my personal finding.
What is the situation of women belonging to minority communities?
So, as you know, as you know, that Pakistan has a very small minority community, where nearly 98% Muslims and Sunni Hanafi Muslims, with minority sects within Islam, and the Hindu population and Christian population are small and pocketed and increasingly ghettoized. But with regard to gender relations, one of the big complications or paradoxes is that there's a lot of suddenly, men only become interested when there is an opportunity to compete with other men or other sort of ethnicities or religions or minorities. So one thing that my men in Pakistan agree on is the need to save women from underage marriage or girls from underage marriage because they want to defend their religious and prevent religious conversions. And their men become very patrons of these young women and want to prevent the conversions of girls, or want to claim conversion of Hindu girls into Muslims in order to get married, etc. So we see some activity over there. The complication over there is very often these are not forced conversions and forced marriages. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're quite consensual, even if they are underage, or even if they're not, if they're interfaith. And there, the women's movement has to get involved, do deeper investigation, find out if it is by a consensus or whether it is families who are sort of preventing a genuine thing. So with regard to, you'll hear a lot of stories about forced conversions of Hindu girls into Muslims, but one needs to look at it a little bit deeper into what's happening over there. So that's one thing. And ghettoization, like any minority, it's becoming very difficult to live free lives, and there's risk, there's fear that is increased. But we do have women leaders within these minority communities that we work with and try and sort of extend solidarity so that they are not living under risk. The Women's Network and Human Rights Network has a fairly good connectivity, and they tend to respond very quickly, but it's just that there's so many abuses now that it's become hard to address all of them. But there is affinity and networking between the minorities and human rights and women's rights movements in Pakistan.
Questions? Do you have any final remarks before we close?
I just wanted to sort of, just to bring it up to date, is to just to say that the one thing to watch out for now is that Pakistan has recently passed the 26th Amendment to its constitution. And one of the results of this has been the setting up of a constitutional bench. That is an added layer of statehood or state institution that has been. And I think that in recent, you will see in Pakistan's politics today, including Imran Khan, objecting to this amendment, because it also is empowering the military. The military courts are being sort of, the attempt is to extend military courts jurisdiction to civilians and to try them over there. There is a very serious clash of male egos across state institutions that is taking place. It's between the judiciary, the Chief Justice of Pakistan, between the military heads and the legislative heads. And this kind of institutional clash, and with these male elites, it's a particularly precarious time internally, domestically for Pakistan. And ironically, at the same time, the economy seems to be doing better. It seems to be picking up because the PMLN tends to be a party that controls the economy slightly better. But Pakistan has always not managed to do this balance. There's some kind of internal chaos going on, military excesses. The different institutions do not know their boundaries, and those boundaries have got to be better respected and better stretched. I don't see that happening. I don't think that this amendment is a good step in that direction. But if you understand this about Pakistan, that in terms of the institutional unsettlement and lack of stability is really due to these kind of things. Yes, external powers, external, regional concerns and challenges. Pakistan's always felt isolated in the region as well, which is its own doing. And just when it starts to settle under civilian rule, we get external complications, and so it's a complicated. It's a sort of the balance of it is what is the challenge in Pakistan right now. And if you are studying Pakistan, perhaps that's one way to, that's a good way to look at it, to try and see the relationship between these and then see the movements outside of it, which includes, women who are supporting Imran Khan, and those who are looking at democracy, and those who are looking at feminism and the Me Too movement. In that will give you a more holistic picture of the complexes and the paradoxes that I tried
Are
to
you going to see a new form of civil military relationship in near future?
There's always going to be a civil military relationship that is going to be,
since 2008, since 2008, military has been.
So, like the People's Party, one lesson that we learned from their methods was that they cut deals, right? I mean, they negotiate, they cut deals with it. And that has been one definition of democracy for them, whether we agree with it or not, right? Imran's is a more radical, bull in a china shop, take head on kind of approach. It has its own benefits. Like I said, a window of opportunity does open up. It does scare them for a little while. But they only know brute force how to respond to it that way. The PMLN sort of becomes a proxy, it goes back to its genetic sort of foundation of being a military made party. So if these three parties were to collaborate, were to come to some kind of consensus, were to dialogue openly, not this, sort of male egos playing against each other, and this facade and this fakeness and this performativity. If they lost that and got serious and had it, I think there would be far more, it would send out a much better message to the military on who's going to be, lead the country, who's going to be the definers of democracy and the future of Pakistan, and make decisions over there. Until that time, I don't see, I see it's only the military benefiting in this relationship.
Thanks, Afia, for insightful presentation. And I thank all our participants also, and we hope to see you in next ISASI. Thanks, Afia.
Thank you so much, Amit. My pleasure.